My top 6 tips for feeding a family on a budget. Let's have a look. Hello and welcome to another episode of Heise Says. I'm Rachel Heise, and today we are going to look at feeding a family frugally. So as many of you will already know, Florine and myself, we have 4 children, so we're a family of 6, and the food budget is probably our second biggest personal expense after our mortgage. So getting that down to be as most economical as possible is a big priority, and feeding the family is my job. So I do the shopping and I do the cooking, so we'll just get right into it. And I want to huge shout out to our subscribers. This was requested in the live stream the other night, so you asked for it and now you're going to get it. So my first tip is to buy your meat in bulk. So I recently did a video where I went through buying a 4/4 of beef. So we buy beef a quarter, a half, or a whole beast at a time. So that's between, a quarter is about 50 kilos. So we buy in bulk. So that's a bit of an outlay. You need to have, it was about 470. So you need to have some capital to put into that to begin with. But once you've bought your meat in bulk, the best thing about this is I have found that if I have a freezer full of meat, I don't need to do meal planning, because I just go, open up the freezer, what do I feel like? Steak. Know what I'm having for dinner. And so I'll bring the meat out in the morning, and that means I won't need to basically work out what are we going to have for dinner. So if you can't buy your meat in bulk, if the cost is just too much to buy that much, I would be going for the cheaper cuts. So sausages, mince, silverside, your chicken drumsticks, and another one to throw in is don't dismiss the organ meat. You can mix it in with the others. Like I hide liver in with the mince. I just chuck it in the food processor and put some in the mince, and you put enough over the top, no one will know it's there, and it's actually cheaper per kilo than the muscle meat and really nutritious. So that's another way of padding out a meal without having to add like rice or pasta. So yeah, and that's probably a good one. I also, on the no meal planning, I do occasionally do a couple of slow cooks, probably 2 or 3 a week, and I do frozen meals like bakes, but I only tend to do them when the veggies are in season. And a good tip if you are doing bakes in the freezer is always write the instructions of what to do when you get it out of the freezer, so temperature and how long in the oven, that kind of thing. I find if I've done that, if Florian's stuck, he can pull it out of the freezer and I don't need to tell him what to do because it's all written on the alfoil. So my next tip, don't eat out. So eating out can be a huge expense in your family food budget. So for us, having 4 kids and 2 grown-ups, eating out is just way too expensive. It's something that we only do for special occasions, birthdays, that kind of thing, or if friends have invited us out. But we avoid going out to eat because there are so many of us. We used to eat out a lot when it was just Florine and myself, but these days, there's too many people to feed, and it's really frustrating when you feed the kids and then they only eat half of it. You're like, the frustration, but you can't exactly force feed them. When we were eating out a lot, the biggest thing was, you could work all day and then you're on the way home and you're both tired and you go, do you feel like cooking? No, I don't feel like cooking. Let's just get Macca's. So to avoid that, you need to always have quick, easy meals like on hand at home, so you can just go home and you know you've got dinner in 20 minutes. It's not going to be 45 minutes, an hour until you eat. You need to have food there that you can just whip up quickly, because if it's going to take an hour, you probably will just get takeaway. Another tip for that is organise your recipes. If your recipes are easy to find, then it's another way of reducing, what are we going to have for dinner? And comes back to having meat on hand. And I would make a point of buying snack food that will fill you up. So like cheese and salami is a favourite of ours. That way, if you end up just snacking while you try to work out what you're going to have for dinner, you're snacking on something that's nutritious and filling, and it'll end up being that you have cheese and salami for dinner and you haven't gotten the takeaway, and by the time you're like, oh, I can't be bothered, let's just get takeaway, you've already had your dinner of cheese and salami. And another tip for not eating out is when we had an office, I would cook at work. So I ended up I brought in an electric fry pan and I would cook bacon and eggs, and I would cook a steak, and I would have steak and salad. And sure, you can smell out the office and everyone else has to put up with the smell of steak, but it saved us time and we ate a lot better, and it saved us money on going out for lunch. I'm not a big fan of the packed sandwiches. I tend to bring leftovers or nothing. So if you can cook food at work, that will save you some serious money. I ended up keeping a mini pantry in the office just so I could cook lunch. And I'd also cook breakfast, and sometimes it was just easier to get out the door and eat when we got to work, just to take the stress out of the morning, if you can. And also, being architects, we had some big hours, and rather than getting takeout for the whole office and all of our staff, I would often cook us all dinner at work. So, next tip is separate your shopping. So, obviously I buy my meat from the butcher in big chunks. So when I do my grocery shop, I am not buying any meat as part of my grocery shop. So the next thing I separate is my veggies. I get them from the greengrocer, and I get them as we need them, so they're not based on any schedule. So I'll only buy them when we've eaten everything that we've bought previously. So if it took us 2 weeks, if it took us 3 weeks, if it took us 4 weeks, I'll wait until everything is eaten in the crisper before I go back to the greengrocer. That way it forces us to eat the things that I thought, oh, that's a good idea, but didn't actually get to eat. And rather than you keep on stocking up the fresh, and then you end up throwing a lot out. And it also means you time it so that you buy your fruit and veg between your major food shops, so you've got space in the fridge to keep everything. But since we've gone keto and dabbled in carnivore, we don't tend to have as many veggies, so it very much is you get it when we need it, and it's not going to be every week. We don't get our spices from the shops. We go to a wholesaler and buy our spices in bulk. It's significantly cheaper, and we probably go there once a year, and I get a whole lot of spices, and that lasts and lasts and lasts. And you're spending a little bit more to begin with, but price per kilo is hugely different. And then our groceries is everything else that hasn't been bought. Which is my next tip. My next tip is shop bi-monthly or monthly. That way, rather than shopping fortnightly, if you shop bi-monthly, you're only going to the shops 24 times a year, not 26. So it might sound like a bit pedantic, but that's 2 less food shops a year. and you can spend that money in those 6 months apart. It usually falls. You got those fortnights where you don't have a food shop. You can then go to the butcher and buy your meat with what you would have spent on groceries. So we tend, being self-employed, our income doesn't come in once a fortnight. So it just makes sense for us to follow a monthly cycle. So I like to do a big shop on the first of the month, regardless of what day that falls on, and I try and get as much as I can. So I get all the nappies and I get all of the washing detergent, and I try to buy everything for the month. And then on the 15th I do a second shop, but that's a top-up shop. It's a little shop. It's usually to get more dairy and things that we've run out of. And if we run out of something between those shopping days, we run out. So I don't like to go back. The other advantage of this is you only buy chocolate twice a month. You're not going to the shops every 2 or 3 days. Every time you go to the shops, you end up just buying stuff that's yummy, that you don't need. So if you reduce the number of times you're there, you reduce the amount of impulse buying. So to make that work, we have long life milk and we keep the bread in the freezer, and it's worth getting organised. So I'll just show you, I might flick this over. So this, can you see? So that's my shopping list, and each column is a fortnight. And so if you keep a running total, you can, over time, you can see, okay, I bought 5, well, what's an example on here? I don't know, washing liquid. So I bought 1, and then I realised I ran out, so the next time I bought 2. And then after a couple of shops, I can work out how much we actually use in that half month, or in the month in the case of washing liquid. So you can see over time how much you use, and then that is a great way to basically develop your shopping list. I used to do that in Excel, and I put all the maths in there, and I could predict how much the shopping would cost. And if you are really, really needing to tighten your budget, I'd recommend doing it so that you can either that or shop online, so you can really look at everything you're going to put in the trolley and get an idea of what it costs at the end. And if it's more than your budget, you can go back through the list and you can tweak it, and you can go, okay, let's buy less of the extra tasty and more of the tasty cheese, and use that kind of decision making when you're at home to work out what you're going to buy and how much it'll cost at the end. Especially when your shop is quite big, it can be very difficult to know what you're going to be spending at the end of the shop any other way. So unless you get used to your own shop, I tend to cook the same things every month, so that's one reason why I don't need to plan out what meals we're going to have, because it's the same thing. So it means that my shopping list is fairly consistent every month. As boring as it is, it makes my life a lot easier. So the next tip to save money with your food budget is to minimise food waste. So most of our food waste is by little people making or learning, it's child development, learning how to pour cups of milk, and learning that you can, if you open the container, it will fall all over the floor. So that can't really be helped. We tried putting a lock on the fridge, but it got broken, and you just sacrifice it to child development. So for us, we buy milk in 1 litre long life cartons, because if the kids spill it, they only spill 1 litre and they don't spill 2. So that's the kind of thing where you're spending a little bit more to buy a smaller container, but you've got less waste. I make a point of not over defrosting meat, so I will, in the morning, I'll take out the meat for dinner and possibly the next day. So I won't take out more than 2 days worth of meat, because if something comes up and we don't end up eating it, or if I overcook and we have leftovers, I don't have meat sitting there for half a week or a week, and then by the time I get there it's off. So that's a big tip, is only defrost what you need. If you need more, you can defrost it. So if you have too much in your fridge, you won't get through it and you'll have food waste. For those people with babies in their life, get all the leftovers from everyone in the family, put it all in a blender and blend it up, no matter what it is, and then put that in ice cube trays, and you've got baby food. So our little one, she's been having blended steak and veggies since she started solid food, because it's all mush, and it's a great way to use up those leftovers if you have babies in your life. Just with the food waste, remember, it's not a goodbye if you don't actually use it. So this is especially important when you go to the greengrocer. So you think, oh, that's awesome, that's so cheap, and you get a lot of it. If you're not actually going to eat that much, it's not a goodbye. So just buy what you know you're going to eat, and don't go beyond that, because if you end up throwing it out, it's not a goodbye. I actually find that meal planning leads to wastage in our household, because I tend to plan a meal for every night, and then we'll cook up 2, and then we'll have leftovers on the 3rd. And then if I go, oh, okay, it's only 3 days, I'll leave this much food out and not freeze it, then I don't get to it. It ends up going to waste. So if you do meal plan, just if you're not going to eat the food today or tomorrow, freeze it, especially your meat. Just freeze it, because it just goes to waste. And I tend to, once again, I buy things in smaller containers. Like for corn for the kids, I'll leave the little tins. I won't get a normal size tin, because I know they'll only eat half of a normal size tin. So I'm better off buying the smaller ones and opening 2 than opening a big one and throwing away half. So I also once I went through a hummus phase, and I bought this huge tin of chickpeas, and I opened it up and I used about the equivalent of 2 cans, and then I put the rest in a Tupperware container in the fridge, and I didn't get to it, and after a couple of months it was a bad idea, and I had to get rid of it, and I think I ended up throwing out the container. So don't buy in bulk in terms of big tins or big servings if you're not going to get through it, because you're just going to have food waste. So it's not really a bargain if you end up throwing half of it out. And another thing for food waste is learn how to preserve food. So we end up buying our garlic as little cloves, and we preserve them ourselves in vinegar in jars, so that we've always got garlic cloves we can crush up. And beetroot, when it's in season, I'll buy a stack of beetroot and I'll cook it up in the pressure cooker, and I'll make some liquid and I'll jar it up, and then that's a way of basically, if you can preserve your food, if you make your own onion and garlic jam or any kind of spreads, if you can make that yourself, then it's a great way to get food in season and preserve it and make it last a lot longer and have lots of yummy stuff in the cupboard. And just make sure you check the fridge for leftovers before you cook a new meal, because if you've got enough to make a meal from leftovers, do that. Otherwise you'll keep making new meals and you'll never get through the leftovers and you'll end up throwing it out. So my next tip is to cook from basics. So this is not always going to be cheaper. So the main reason for us why I like to cook from basics is because it's pretty much the only way to eliminate vegetable oil and added sugars from your diet. So things that are cheaper to make from basics are bolognese sauce, stock, your rendered beef fat and tallow. I find taco spices, rather than getting the packet, I'll just make up my own spice mix. Play-Doh is a lot cheaper to make than buy. Pavlova is cheap to make and not necessarily cheap to buy. But things that you won't find are economical to make as opposed to buying are bread. It costs a lot more to make your own bread than to buy it. Mayonnaise, just the price of the olive oil. It's cheaper to buy than to make, but you're going to get a better product. Chicken strips, cakes, tomato sauce, they're kind of things that are more expensive to make from basics, but it'll taste a lot better and be better for you. And so finally, it's some other tips. I love this. It's always yummier on someone else's plate. Is keep an eye on your cost per kilo. So recently we had a new Costco open in Brisbane and we went and checked it out, and I brought my trusty spreadsheet with me which had cost per kilo that I was currently paying for everything from Aldi, and we went through the store and Florian's like, what about this one? What about this one? What about this one? This looks great. And I'm like, it's cheaper at Aldi. It's cheaper at Aldi. It's cheaper at Aldi. And it might only be 1 or 2 cents a kilo, but when you have to pay a membership fee and then you find everything is the same price, it's not worth it. So it's worth keeping an eye on your cost per kilo, and if you have the same shopping list week in, week out, actually make a point of working out what the cost per kilo you're paying for everything is. So if you go to another shop, you can price check. Everyone seems to make their products at a different size container, so you never know whether you're actually paying more or less. You've got to really work it out to cost per kilo to see whether the deal really is better or not. And the other thing is, I'm a stay-at-home mum, and so for those of you who are on a single income or thinking they might end up on a single income, is look at your food budget and look at if there was someone at home who could spend more time cooking and preparing food, how much would that save you in not getting takeaway? And add that to your equation when you're looking at the cost benefit of having 2 incomes versus having 1 income. Because I know from our family, making more time for cooking and more time in the kitchen, as much as I loathe saying it, it is actually, it makes a difference to our family budget. And yeah, when you can spend the time cooking, you're not getting the convenience food, so you are saving some money. Well, I hope you all enjoyed, and if you could press the like button and all that kind of thing, that would be great, and add some comments, and if you have any other suggestions, then I might be able to do them next time. And we'll see you later.